Derek Langston stared at the wooden boards beneath his feet. But something felt wrong. The floor of his barn had always been solid. It was built by his grandfather 40 years ago. Now, however, this particular section echoed hollow when he walked across it. He had been repairing the damaged corner post when he noticed the difference. It was a sound that shouldn't exist in a barn with a packed earth foundation. He knelt down and pressed his ear to the boards. The hollow sound was unmistakable. Derek had lived on this land his entire life and walked these floors countless times, but he had never heard it before. His grandfather had built everything on this property with his own hands. Every fence post, every beam, every plank. There were no secrets here. There couldn't be. Derek pried up the first board with his crowbar, then the second, and then the third. What he found underneath defied everything he thought he knew about his family's land. A rectangular opening led down into darkness, with wooden steps descending into what appeared to be a carefully constructed tunnel. The steps were worn smooth, as if they had been used regularly. But that was impossible. His grandfather had died 15 years ago, and Derek had lived alone on the property ever since. He lowered himself into the tunnel, struck a match, and saw something that made his blood freeze. Fresh footprints in the dust. Recent footprints. Someone had been down here within the last few days. But Derek hadn't been in this tunnel before today. In fact, he didn't even know it existed. He was the only person with access to this barn, the only person for miles around. As he followed the tunnel deeper underground, the match revealed wooden support beams and carefully carved walls. This wasn't a hastily dug hiding place. It was the work of a professional, someone who knew what they were doing and had planned it carefully. Someone had been using it recently. The tunnel stretched further than his matchlight could reach. But at the edge of the flickering glow, Derek saw something that made him question everything he believed about his inheritance. There was a leather chair, a table, and personal belongings arranged as if someone lived down there. He realized that for 35 years, he had been walking above a secret world that someone had been actively maintaining. It wasn't just a question of who had built this tunnel beneath his barn. Who had been living in it while he slept peacefully in the house above? And why had they finally decided to let him find it? Derek struck another match and moved deeper into the tunnel. The leather chair faced away from him, as if someone had recently been sitting there, watching the entrance. On the wooden table beside the chair lay a tin cup, still damp with water, and a plate with crumbs that hadn't gathered dust yet. Someone had eaten there within the last day or two. His hands trembled as he examined the scattered belongings throughout the underground room. There was a wool blanket folded neatly on a makeshift bed. A collection of books was stacked against the wall. These were personal items that spoke of someone living down here, not just hiding. This wasn't a temporary shelter. This was a home. Derek picked up one of the books and opened it to the first page. Written in careful handwriting were the words, "Property of Samuel Langston, 1851. It was his grandfather's name in handwriting, but his grandfather had died 15 years ago, and Derek had gone through every possession in the house above. These books had never been there. A metal box sat beneath the table, secured with a simple latch. Derek opened it and found documents that took his breath away. Deeds to properties he had never heard of. Letters addressed to his grandfather from people whose names meant nothing to him. At the bottom was a photograph of 3 men standing in front of the barn above his head. But the barn looked different somehow. It looked newer, with structures that no longer existed. One of the men in the photograph was definitely his grandfather, but he looked younger than Derek had ever seen him. The other 2 men were strangers. Yet, there was something familiar about their faces that made Derek's stomach twist with unease. He turned the photograph over and found writing in his grandfather's hand. The agreement holds. The land stays divided. No one speaks of what happened here. SL 1852. Derek stared at the words until his match burned down to his fingers. What agreement? What happened on this land that required such secrecy? Why had his grandfather built this elaborate hiding place to conceal these documents and belongings? As he lit another match, he noticed something else that chilled him to the bone: fresh candle wax on the table. There was recent ash in a small metal dish. Someone had been burning candles, cooking food, and living as if this underground room were their home. But Derek owned this land. He had legally inherited it from his grandfather, who had worked the land for decades before him. No one else had any claim to the property. No one else should even know about this tunnel. The sound of footsteps above him made Derek freeze. Someone was walking across the barn floor above him with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. But Derek lived alone. There were no neighbors for miles. He had no visitors expected. Whoever had been living in the tunnel had returned and was directly above him. Derek blew out his match and pressed himself against the tunnel wall, listening to the deliberate footsteps above. The person walking across his barn floor moved with purpose, as if they knew exactly where they were going. The footsteps stopped directly over the hidden entrance. A woman's voice called down through the floorboards, clear and calm. "You can come up now, Derek. I know you're down there." Derek's heart hammered against his ribs. No one should know his name. No one should know about this tunnel. No one should be in his barn without permission. Yet this woman spoke as if she had been expecting him to find this place. "I'm not going anywhere until you explain what this is," he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's exactly what I'm here to do," the woman replied. "But I'd rather not have this conversation through a wooden floor. My name is Olivia Harrow. I've been waiting for you to discover that tunnel for 3 months." Derek climbed the wooden steps slowly, his mind racing with questions. When he emerged into the barn, he saw a woman around his age with dark hair pulled back severely, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his face. She wore a simple traveling dress and carried a well-used leather satchel. "How do you know my name?" Derek demanded. "I know a great deal about you, Derek Langston. I know you inherited this land from your grandfather Samuel. I know you've been living here alone since his death. I also know that you've never been down in that tunnel before today." Olivia set her satchel on a hay bale, opened it, and pulled out a thick folder. "What I need to know is whether you're ready to learn the truth about what your grandfather really did on this land. My grandfather was an honest man. He worked this land fairly and earned everything he had." Olivia's expression grew grim. "Your grandfather was involved in something that affected a lot of people. It was supposed to stay buried forever. But circumstances have changed, and the families involved need to settle this once and for all." She pulled a document from her folder and handed it to Derek. It was a contract, written in his grandfather's handwriting and dated 1852, but its contents made no sense. There were references to shared ownership, rotation of residence, and concealment from authorities. At the bottom were 3 signatures: Samuel Langston, Thomas Harrow, and William Cross. "Thomas Harrow was my grandfather," Olivia said quietly. "According to the contract," she said, "my family owns 1/3 of the land on which my family has lived for generations. We've been honoring the agreement to stay hidden, but the contract expires next month. After that, we will reclaim our portion of the property." Derek stared at the document, his world tilting off its axis. "This is impossible. I have the deed to this land. It's been in my family for decades." "You have one deed, Derek, but there are 2 others hidden in places your grandfather never told you about. And the families who hold those deeds are coming to collect what's rightfully theirs." The sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley, growing louder by the second. Derek looked from the contract to Olivia's face, searching for signs of deception. "You're telling me someone else has been living in that tunnel, and it wasn't you?" "I've never been down there in my life," Olivia said firmly. "I only knew about the tunnel because my grandfather left detailed maps in his papers. But if someone has been using it," she paused, her confident expression shifting to concern. "Show me what you found." Derek led her back down into the tunnel, striking a match. Olivia examined fresh candle wax, the damp cup, and the neatly arranged belongings, growing more and more alarmed. "This changes everything," she whispered, picking up one of the books. "These belong to your grandfather, but someone has been caring for them and reading them. Someone who knows about the agreement." "What agreement exactly?" Derek demanded. "What did our grandfathers do that was so important it had to be hidden underground?" Olivia's face grew pale in the flickering candlelight. "They found something on this land in 1852. It was valuable enough that 3 families agreed to share it secretly, rather than letting the territorial government claim it. My grandfather's papers called it the discovery that would change everything. However, he never wrote down what it actually was." The sound of horses grew closer, accompanied by the creak of wagon wheels and the voices of men calling out commands. Derek counted at least 4 different speakers, maybe more. "Those aren't my people," Olivia said quickly. "I came alone." Derek grabbed the metal box containing his grandfather's documents. "Then who are they?" "The 3rd family, it has to be." Olivia gathered the loose papers from the table. "William Cross signed that contract alongside our grandfathers, so if his descendants know about the tunnel and have been watching this place." The footsteps above them multiplied as several people entered the barn. A deep, authoritative voice boomed through the floorboards. "Miss Harrow, we know you're here. Your horse is tied outside. Mr. Langston, we know you found the entrance. There's no point in hiding now." Derek and Olivia exchanged glances. Someone had been watching them both, waiting for this exact moment. "We need to see what's in that tunnel," the voice continued. "All of it. Not just the living space, but also the back chambers your grandfather sealed off. The contract expires in 3 weeks, and we intend to collect what our family is owed." "Back chambers?" Derek whispered to Olivia. "There are more rooms down here." Olivia pointed toward the far end of the tunnel where Derek's match barely reached. "According to my grandfather's maps, this tunnel extends much further. There should be at least 3 more chambers, all connected. However, they were supposed to be permanently sealed." A new sound echoed through the tunnel, metal scraping against wood. It sounded like someone was prying up floorboards in a different part of the barn. "They're opening another entrance," Olivia breathed. "They know about access points that we don't." The scraping sounds grew louder, followed by the thud of heavy boots descending wooden steps from a different direction. Derek realized with growing dread that his grandfather had built multiple entrances to this underground system, and that the Cross family knew about all of them. A lantern's glow appeared at the far end of the tunnel, casting long shadows toward Derek and Olivia. 3 figures approached, led by a tall man with gray hair and sharp features that Derek found unsettlingly similar to the stranger in his grandfather's photograph. "Marcus Cross," the man introduced himself. His voice carried the same authority that had echoed through the barn floor. "And you must be Samuel Langston's grandson. You look just like him." "Unfortunately," Derek said, stepping protectively in front of Olivia. "Your grandfather cost my family a great deal of money, Mr. Langston. For nearly 50 years, we've honored the agreement to make it seem like this land belongs to one family. But the contract clearly states that, once the original signers were deceased, their descendants would divide the profits equally." Marcus gestured to the 2 men flanking him. "My sons have been taking care of this place, maintaining the tunnels, and protecting what's hidden in the sealed chambers. We've been living in shifts down here for months, waiting for Miss Harrow to make contact and for you to discover what your grandfather left you." Derek's mind reeled. "You're the ones who've been living down here." "Someone had to protect the assets," Marcus replied coldly. "Especially once we learned that Miss Harrow was preparing to claim her family's share. We couldn't risk her accessing the sealed chambers without proper supervision." Olivia spoke up, her voice tense. What exactly is in those chambers that requires such protection? Marcus smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. Your grandfathers were very clever men, Miss Harrow. They discovered something on this land that the territorial government would have confiscated. Immediately, something worth enough money to support 3 families for generations if managed properly. He walked to a section of the tunnel wall that looked identical to all the others. When he pressed his hand against a specific wooden beam, however, a hidden panel slid aside. Cool air flowed from the opening, carrying a metallic scent that made Derek's stomach tighten. Silver or Marcus had announced a vein running directly under the property, which your grandfathers decided to mine in secret. They built this entire tunnel system to extract and hide the silver without filing claims with the territorial authorities. No taxes, no government oversight, and no legal complications. Derek stared at the hidden opening, finally understanding. That's why they needed secrecy, and why they divided the land among 3 families but made it appear as one property. Exactly. For 50 years, the silver accumulated in these chambers, waiting for the contract to expire so that it could be properly divided. Marcus's expression hardened. But first, we need to determine whether you and Miss Harrow are willing to honor the original agreement, or if you plan to claim the entire treasure for yourselves. One of Marcus's sons whispered something urgent in his ear, and Marcus's face turned white. Impossible, Marcus breathed. You're certain about what you saw? The back chamber is completely empty. Father, someone else has been here before us. Marcus Cross led them through a hidden panel into a chamber stretching far beyond what Derek had imagined possible. The walls were lined with wooden shelving and metal containers, all of which were empty. Tools for mining were scattered across the floor, and deep gouges in the rock walls showed where silver ore had been systematically extracted over decades. 50 years of work, Marcus said bitterly, running his hand along the empty shelves. Generations of secret mining, all gone. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for and took it all. Derek examined the mining tools more closely. These look recently used. The metal isn't rusted, and there's fresh dust on the handles. Someone has been working down here within the last few months. One of Marcus's sons said, "We found evidence of recent digging, fresh tool marks on the walls, and new support beams that weren't here the last time we checked." Olivia picked up a partially torn piece of paper from the floor, which was still readable. It's a transport record. Someone was moving large quantities of raw silver too. She squinted at the faded writing. The signature was too smudged to read, but it was dated 3 months ago. 3 months? Derek felt a chill run down his spine. That's exactly when you said you started waiting for me to discover the tunnel. Marcus turned to face Olivia suspiciously. Very convenient timing, Miss Harrow. You arrive, claiming to want your family's share, just when the silver disappears. I had nothing to do with this, Olivia protested. I've been researching my grandfather's papers for over a year, trying to understand what the contract meant. I only learned the exact location of this property 3 months ago. From whom? Derek demanded. Who told you where to find me? Olivia hesitated, and Derek saw guilt flash across her face. A lawyer in town. He said he'd been waiting for the right time to contact the Langston family about some old business arrangements. Marcus and his sons exchanged meaningful glances. What was the lawyer's name again? Edwards, James Edwards. He had an office above the general store in Millfield. He said he had been holding documents from Marcus's grandfather since 1852. Derek felt the ground shift beneath his feet. There's no lawyer named Edwards in Millfield. I know everyone in that town. The office above the general store has been empty for years. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Marcus spoke in a deadly calm voice. Someone has been playing all 3 of our families against each other. They knew about the silver, the contract, and exactly how to manipulate us into coming here at the same time. He looked directly at Derek. He wanted us to discover the theft together so that we would suspect each other instead of looking for the real culprit. But who else knew? Olivia whispered. Derek thought about the photograph he'd found. 3 men standing together in friendship before everything went wrong. Someone our grandfathers trusted enough to confide in. Someone who had been waiting 50 years for the perfect moment to take it all. The sound of slow applause echoed through the tunnel from the main chamber. Derek, Olivia, and the Cross family turned toward the entrance and saw a woman stepping into the lantern light. She was older than the rest of them, perhaps 60, with silver hair and eyes that held decades of carefully controlled anger. "Excellent detective work," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Derek couldn't place. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Langston. Someone our grandfathers trusted. They betrayed her so thoroughly that it took me 30 years to piece together what really happened here." Marcus stepped protectively in front of his sons. "Who are you?" "Elena Vasquez." "My grandfather was Roberto Vasquez, the man who discovered this silver vein in 1851. He was the man your grandfather murdered and buried somewhere on this property so they could steal his claim." Derek felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. My grandfather was an honest man." "Your grandfather was a killer, along with Thomas Harrow and William Cross. Roberto came to them as partners. He showed them the silver he'd found and asked for their help in establishing a legal claim properly. Instead, they killed him and divided his discovery among themselves." Elena pulled a worn leather journal from her coat. "This belonged to my grandfather. In it, he wrote everything down, including the exact location where he found the silver, the conversations he had with your grandfathers, and his growing suspicion that they were planning to betray him. His final entry was written the night before he disappeared." She opened the journal and read aloud. "They agreed to meet me at dawn to discuss the partnership contracts. Samuel suggested that we finalize everything in the tunnel system that he has been building. I pray I am wrong about my suspicions, but I fear I will not see another sunrise." Olivia grabbed Derek's arm, her face pale with horror. "The sealed chambers. What if they weren't just for storing silver?" "The back chamber contains more than empty shelves," Elena confirmed grimly. "I found my grandfather's remains 3 months ago, along with evidence of how he died. Your grandfather didn't just steal from him. They executed him and built this entire operation on top of his grave." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've spent 3 decades tracking down every document, every witness, and every piece of evidence that proves what happened here. When I finally had enough proof, I decided to take back what was stolen from my family." Elena smiled coldly. "Every ounce of silver that came out of this mine belonged to Roberto Vasquez. I simply collected what was rightfully mine." Derek realized the full scope of what Elena had accomplished. "You created the fake lawyer. You manipulated all of us into coming here. I wanted you to see the truth with your own eyes. I wanted you to understand that your family's entire foundation was built on murder and theft. The silver is gone. Yes, but it was never yours to begin with. Where is it now?" Marcus demanded. Elena turned toward the tunnel exit. "It's being used to build schools and hospitals in towns where my grandfathers, real descendants, live. Towns where the Vasquez name means something other than victim. You can't prove any of this," Derek said desperately. Elena's smile grew wider. "I don't need to prove it, Mr. Langston. I just needed to take back what was stolen and watch your families destroy each other, fighting over a treasure that was never yours." Derek stared at Elena, his entire world crumbling around him. Everything he had believed about his grandfather, his family, and his rightful inheritance was built on a foundation of murder and theft. The land he had worked, the barn he had repaired, and the legacy he had treasured were all stained with blood nearly 50 years old. All of it was stained with blood nearly 50 years old. "Show us," Derek said quietly. Show us the proof. Elena led them deeper into the tunnel system to a chamber that Derek hadn't known existed. Behind a carefully constructed false wall lay the skeletal remains of a man, along with personal effects that told the story of his final days: a silver crucifix, a leather pouch containing mining tools, and most damning of all, a bullet hole in the back of the skull. Roberto Vasquez was shot from behind, Elena said matter-of-factly. He was murdered while examining the very silver vein he had discovered. Your grandfathers buried him here and built their empire on top of his grave. Marcus Cross had gone completely silent. His face was pale with shock. His son stood behind him, clearly struggling to process what they were learning about their family legacy. Olivia knelt beside the remains, her voice shaking. All these years, we thought our grandfathers were pioneers, honest men who built something from nothing. Instead, they were killers. The question now, Elena said, is what you intend to do with this knowledge. I've taken back the silver that belonged to my grandfather's family. But technically, this land, these buildings, and this property should belong to Roberto's descendants as well. Derek looked around the chamber, seeing it with completely different eyes. This wasn't his grandfather's clever hiding place. It was a tomb, a monument to greed and betrayal. Every board had been nailed by his grandfather. Every stone had been placed to conceal evidence of murder. I can't live here anymore, Derek said, surprised by his own words. I can't work land that was stolen from a dead man. I can't sleep in a house built with blood money. Marcus finally found his voice. What are you saying? I'm saying that Elena is right. This property doesn't belong to any of us. It belongs to Roberto Vasquez's real descendants, and we need to find them. Elena's expression softened slightly. That's an honorable position, Mr. Langston. But Roberto's only child died young, and his wife remarried and moved east. I'm the closest thing to family he has left. Derek made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. Then it belongs to you. The house, the barn, the land, all of it. I'll sign over the deed and find somewhere else to start over. Derek, no, Olivia protested. You can't just give up everything you've ever known. Everything I've ever known was a lie, Derek replied firmly. I won't build my life on a foundation of murder. I won't profit from stolen land or sleep peacefully over an unmarked grave. Elena studied Derek's face carefully. You understand that walking away from this property means giving up considerable wealth. This land is valuable beyond the silver it contains. I understand that keeping it means becoming part of the crime, Derek answered, and I refuse to do that. 3 days later, Derek stood in the lawyer's office in the county seat, signing the papers that transferred ownership of his family's land to Elena Vasquez. His hand was steady as he wrote his name, even though he was signing away the only life he had ever known. Elena had insisted on paying him a fair price for the property. Derek planned to use the money to start over somewhere far from the shadow of his grandfather's crimes. Marcus Cross and his sons had made the same decision, signing over their claim without argument. Only Olivia had hesitated, but she too ultimately chose to walk away from the money. Roberto will finally have a proper burial, Elena said as Derek handed her the completed deed. After 50 years in an unmarked grave, he'll rest in consecrated ground with a headstone bearing his real name. Derek nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he was carrying. For 35 years, he had lived with the constant pressure of maintaining his grandfather's legacy and preserving what he thought was an honorable inheritance. Now he realized that the way he had felt wasn't responsibility. It was guilt, passed down through generations like a family curse. What will you do now? Olivia asked as they walked out of the lawyer's office together. Head west, Derek replied. Find work with someone who needs an extra hand. Build something honest from the ground up. He looked back at the building that held the documents officially ending his connection to the Langston family land. For the first time in my life, I'll know that everything I own was earned, honestly. Marcus Cross waited by their horses, his expression showing the same mixture of loss and relief that Derek felt. I never thanked you, Langston, for making the right choice, for not fighting to keep what wasn't ours. We all made the right choice, Derek said. It just took us 50 years longer than it should have. Elena appeared in the doorway behind them, holding the deed and the payment drafts. Roberto would have wanted his discovery to bring people together, not tear them apart. Maybe now it finally can. Derek mounted his horse and took one last look at the town where he had always been known as Samuel Langston's grandson. Tomorrow he would ride into a new territory where no one knew his name or his family's history. He would introduce himself as simply Derek, a man looking for honest work and a chance to build something real. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had spent his entire life living in the shadow of a legacy that turned out to be a lie. Now he had the chance to create his own legacy, based on truth, justice, and honesty. As he rode away from everything he had ever known, Derek understood that he would never be the same again. The man who had discovered the tunnel 3 days ago was gone forever, replaced by someone who chose principle over profit and integrity over inheritance. For the first time in his 35 years, Derek Langston felt truly free. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen to watch another unforgettable tale where honor and truth collide in the untamed frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and consider sending a super chat to help us continue bringing you more stories like this one. Your support means everything to us.